Howdy! So typically every 3 months I go through all the movies that I've watched in the past 3 months, but I missed the last sort of quarter, so this is going to be a bit of a double episode where I go through all the movies that I watched through the months of July to December. That being said, I am shooting this 2 weeks early before the end of the year, so I am going to miss out on the things that I watched in the last 2 weeks of the year, but I'll chuck up some text or whatever, just covering everything that I don't talk about here, if you can. So it's about as simple as that. Let's get to it, starting off with the categories, of course. First up is movies that I saw in cinemas, and the first movie that I saw in cinemas in July was Longlegs. And boy, oh boy, Longlegs is one of those movies that got some high praise from my horror movie fan peers, but I gotta say, I do not share that positive opinion. I kinda hate Longlegs. I think I'm a bit too dumb for it. I don't really get it. I don't understand it. I think maybe it's too highbrow for me or something, but I don't know, there was just something about it that just did not work for me. I didn't appreciate it. I'm inherently not really a fan of like supernatural mysteries though, where the answer usually just is something like, the devil did it. And it doesn't have to be that much logic in it. I'm like, so what's the point of anything? Kind of reminds me of that Simpsons quote where they explain, a wizard did it. It's a little bit the same in a lot of horror movies where they're like, yeah, it's the devil did it. And that's a little bit silly to me, and I don't really love that. And Longlegs certainly is that kind of film. I will also say that Nicolas Cage going like, I don't get that. I don't understand. I don't get why people thought that was compelling or scary. It's the same shit he does in every single movie that he does. And like, a lot of people often think that his performances are dumb and silly in other movies, but then in this one, it's scary because he's wearing a bit more makeup, or a lot more makeup, or because there's like creepy music in the background. Like, I just don't understand that distinction. He's doing the same thing and it's just annoying to me. I really kind of hated this movie. I thought the opening was good, and then beyond that, it just lost me more and more as it went along. I know I'm alone in this opinion though, so that's that. Next up, I saw Deadpool 3. I saw this with a good friend of mine. I went to Sydney to go see it with him actually, and we had a good time. But I'm not absolutely obsessed with this movie. I think that Deadpool and Wolverine as characters are great in it together. I'm a huge fan of them. I've got Deadpool and Wolverine tattooed. I got this Deadpool one before the Ryan Reynolds movies, just by the way. That's an important distinction. Anyway, the point is, I like these characters together, but I don't really think the plot or like villain arc or any of that, the story, it didn't really justify any of what was going on to me. And I just ended up thinking that it was a bit of a letdown, really. I didn't care about like what was going on. I only cared about the joke-em-ups, and that can be okay. It is a Deadpool movie, but I don't know. I guess I hoped for a little bit more, and instead it just ended up being fun, but nothing I'd really think about that much after seeing it. Then I saw Trap, M. Night Shyamalan's Trap, and I'm a huge fan of this movie, even though I think a lot of it doesn't make sense. I think there's plot holes all over the place. It just makes me laugh. It's basically a Dexter episode as you're watching this slippery serial killer just get away with everything as he goes along with his like devious plans and shit, getting like almost caught left, right, and center. I love that stuff. It's kind of fun. Next up, I saw Beetlejuice, which I had absolutely no expectations for, but ended up really liking. It's wacky all the way through. There's great visual gags in the background, and it's just a hell of a lot of fun. It really caught me off guard, to be honest. I was in the middle of it. I'm like, this is the best fucking movie ever. What the fuck? I had no expectations. That was a bit of an exaggeration, but still, it just goes to show how much I enjoyed this thing. Then I saw Speak No Evil. I saw this with my parents. I kind of tricked them into seeing it because horror isn't really their thing, but since it was more of a psychological thriller, I kind of talked them into seeing it with me, and we all kind of enjoyed it. James McAvoy, I think, is definitely the standout here, but the whole thing is pretty fun. It's very tense and stuff, and it's just good. Plus, I really love the third act. I thought it was much better than the original film that this is a remake of. Just in my personal opinion, I thought that original ending was a little bit too cynical, but also far-fetched. I didn't buy into it. Then I saw Joker 2, and I'm one of the only people in the world that actually likes this movie. I better keep a tight lip on that or whatever. Joker 2, I don't really understand the hate, the intense hatred. Everybody hates it. Like, everybody seems to hate it. And I don't really understand the opinion of thinking that it's a huge betrayal to the original. I think it really just continues the story of Arthur Fleck, who is this sad, pathetic man. I don't know. He's kind of always been that, and I just don't understand, what did you want from this? I don't understand what you wanted following the original Joker to this. You wanted him doing, these grand scheme robberies, at the start of The Dark Knight or something? That's not the kind of character that Arthur Fleck is. That's not the kind of Joker that he is. I just don't really understand why everyone hates this movie. It makes no sense to me. Sorry, and I'm not fucking with you. That's my real opinion, but yeah, anyway. Next up, I saw Terrifier 3, another killer clown movie. This was the superior of these two, I suppose. I like them both quite a lot, but Art the Clown I like a lot more as a character, I will say, because he's a hell of a lot of fun as this like silent mime character, just taking delight as he rips people to shreds and stuff. It's very over the top, and at times it's disturbing, but it's also very silly. So it's a mix of a bunch of things in that kind of way. Like, it makes you laugh, but then it kind of makes you feel bad for laughing at the thing you just laughed at. And I kind of think it takes guts to make a film like that and have a character like that be in center stage. And I think it's doing all the right things. This franchise now, I'm really excited to see what comes from it. I don't think that 3 was as good as 2, I will say. 2 is the like golden era of the Terrifier franchise or whatever. I think that they're never going to top Terrifier 2. I don't think anything's ever going to top the like costume store scene where he's putting on all the glasses and shit in the background. That is peak art. I don't think we're ever going to beat it, but I would like to see Damien Leone keep trying. Next up, I saw Smile 2, which I think was better than the first. It was highly intense. It really had me like squirming, to be honest. I'm not really one to be actually full on scared of horror movies, so this one, borderline at least, got me there pretty much. I was pretty nervous at a lot of the scenes going on. There's some standout scenes in the apartment where there's these creepy supernatural haunted dancer people dancing towards somebody in a creepy way. There's also another scene in that same apartment where there's like a naked man or a man in his underwear or something who's just there creepily smiling and chasing them. It's not all just creepy people in an apartment. There are more kinds of scary scenes in this movie, but those were some standout examples. Just good stuff. Executed really, really well. Really heightens the material, which could come off as kind of like a dumb horror movie that's like, you know, Truth or Dare or some other shitty kind of generic horror film like that. It's not on that level. It elevates itself beyond it without being sort of like a very allegorical, elevated horror film or whatever you want to call it. It's still a popcorn horror, but it's just executed really well. Then I saw Venom 3, which was Venom 3. I don't fucking know. I don't have strong opinions on this one way or the other, really. It was fine, I guess. Then I saw Heretic, which I think was my favorite movie of the year. I very much enjoyed this. It is basically about challenging religious people to really critically think about their beliefs, why they believe them, and kind of put them through some deadly games or whatever. It's kind of like the Saw of religion or something, like the religious Saw movie. Though that being said, that's a bit of an unfair representation because a lot of this movie is more just talking, it's conversations, and less so blood and gore and stuff like 24/7. So, you know, with that being said, a lot of people I think would probably find this thing boring, not be super into it and stuff. I found it riveting, personally. I absolutely loved it. Then I saw Gladiator 2. Saw this with my dad, and Gladiator and 2 are just the most perfect dad bro kind of movies, if you know what I mean. They're just very general standard action movies, and they're just good at it. They're just solid action movies that, like, if you watch it, I think just about anybody could like it. Apparently not. There are a lot of people who are kind of shitting on Gladiator 2, apparently. I thought it was pretty good. Maybe not on par with the first one, but almost as good. Then I saw Wicked, which is a movie that I had no expectations for, but ever since seeing it, I've gone Wicked wild, where I've looked up all this stuff about Wicked, all the interviews and everything, stuff on YouTube, all these kinds of things, reading up on it and everything. I didn't know what the story was before seeing it. Nothing. I had no expectations, and only to find out that it's a much more nuanced and complex story than I was expecting, as it's about the sympathetic side of the Wicked Witch and how she kind of gets there. Obviously, this is just part 1, but even that being said, this is a 2 hours 40 movie and it's just a part 1, and honestly, as soon as it ended, I'm like, I could watch the next one right now. I would happily watch 6 straight hours of Wicked, no issue. Alright, now we're up to the next category, which are 2024 movies that I watched at home. First up is In a Violent Nature, which is that movie that is kind of like a Friday the 13th ripoff, except it's told from the perspective of the killer, so it's a little bit more unique in that kind of way, though I don't think it really utilizes the premise as well as it could, because it does deviate a little bit and go off with some other characters and sparing moments and things like that, and I just think that defeats the purpose of what it's going for. I will also say that I found this extremely boring. There's not really much of a hook there in terms of story or getting you to care about anybody or anything, because you're following the killer, obviously, so you're not learning about who the victims are. You're not really learning about who the killer is all that much either. There's not a lot of hand-holding, there's not a lot of exposition, which I get is something that some people really dig because it feels more naturalistic. But to me, I just felt kind of lost and just didn't really care about watching this dude walk through the woods for minutes and minutes on end. I will say, one particular kill, the yoga kill, the one everyone was talking about, instantly iconic. That's definitely a standout. And that is pretty much the one part of this movie that I did highly enjoy. Apart from that, I found it pretty bland. Then I watched The Bike Riders, which is the Austin Butler, Tom Hardy movie about like a bikie gang. And I was kind of watching this thing thinking, God, these guys are kind of just like idiots. Like, I'm not sure. There was something about it that showed like the dramatization of like this gang and being like, why? They're all sitting there in their little matching jackets and stuff, and they just look silly to me. I don't know. There's this part where I think it's Austin Butler's character goes to a bar of like a rival gang's territory or whatever, and he's wearing the jacket that's representing his club or whatever, and they're like mad about it, right? Like, don't wear your jacket in our location or whatever, and he has to be like loyal to his boys or whatever, right? So he's like, fuck you, I'm gonna wear the jacket, blah blah blah. And then he gets beat up for it or whatever, and it's like, I don't sympathize for you. Why wear the jacket in that place? Like, just don't do things like that. I get that like you shouldn't get beat up for wearing a jacket in a place, but you also shouldn't knowingly wear that jacket where you know you're gonna get beat up for it. It's all a little bit dumb and immature. I don't know. Bikie gangs are a little dumb. What do you want me to say? Sorry if you're in a bikie gang, I take that back. And next up is Now a Good Time, which is a Jim Cummings short, Love Ya, which I guess is mainly a satire of commercialism and capitalism, as it's about a guy who basically works for Marvel Studios, who goes in to meet a child who is like part of the Make-A-Wish Foundation or whatever. It's like this dying sick kid or whatever, and his dying wish is to watch the new Captain America movie before it's released. So it's like this highly secretive thing, this operation that the main character is headed off to this kid's house to show him the movie and not let anybody else see any details about it. And basically it's all just about the strict rules and stuff as he goes through all the things that this kid has to do and not show people, not tell people and whatever. And it's really just showing like how much he doesn't give a shit about this kid. And it's very much just about like the cynicism of business, I suppose, and Marvel as a studio and all that kind of stuff. And it's very much like a dark comedy, and I find it interesting. There's not a whole lot to talk about here because it's only a 10-minute long short or whatever, but it's kind of daring and it's interesting to me. Then next up, I watched Jackpot, which is the John Cena Aquafina movie where if you win the jackpot in this near future world, basically you have 24 hours to live as anyone who hears about it tries to kill you, because if they successfully kill you, they get the jackpot instead. It's kind of like The Purge, but it's a comedy, and it's like fairly good. Then I watched Milk and Cereal, which is made by the guys who make the YouTube sketch comedies. The channel is called That's a Bad Idea, but this is like a very serious kind of thriller movie, and it's very, very well done. Shows just how much you can do on a low budget as long as you have the talent. These guys definitely do. I can't wait to see what they do next, but I also love their comedy sketches as well. If you haven't heard of them, I think they're basically like the next Key and Peele. They're just ingenious, these guys. Then I watched Rebel Ridge, which is kind of like a movie that's like Jack Reacher crossed with Rambo, basically, or so I hear. It's basically about this guy in a small town going against the small town crooked cops. And it's kind of fun in that way where you're like, yeah, fuck the man. But I don't know, it was a little bit simplistic for me, and I just like, I wasn't as invested in this as I heard that a lot of people were when it first came out, but it's still solid. Then I watched Maxine, which is the sequel to both X and Pearl, and I think is the weakest of this trilogy by far. I would see myself rewatching X and Pearl, but I don't think I would rewatch Maxine. It was kind of a letdown, if I'm being honest. Ty West, I'm sorry, it didn't need to be a trilogy. You didn't have enough story to tell here, I reckon. And yeah, this movie just wasn't that good. Then I watched Cuckoo, which is about a cuckoo monster, I guess. I don't know, that's being pretty dismissive, but I don't want to spoil it at the same time, but I didn't enjoy this movie. I mainly just found it pretty boring. I don't really have any like good analysis or reason like for saying all this. I just didn't personally like it, you know. Then next up, I watched Blink Twice, which is the John Cena movie where he is playing like an Epstein character, where he has like a creepy celebrity island that he brings women to and exploits. And basically, it's very much about the Me Too era and all that kind of stuff. And it's very dark and disturbing in that way. But it also portrays this dark, disturbing stuff in a way that's like meant to come off as unpleasant and scary. It's a horrible thing that's taking place here. We're not supposed to be looking at it like, oh yeah, this looks cool and fun. No, this is like a full-on horror film where what's going on is portrayed as, I guess, respectfully horrible in a way. And so I don't exactly think it's like offensive to the subject matter or anything like that. I think it's telling kind of an important story in this era of civilization, I suppose. And it's very much also like part of the kind of eat the rich movies that have been coming out over the past few years, like Triangle of Sadness and The Menu and things like that. So yeah, I think it's pretty good. Then I watched What You Wish For, which is also part of that eat the rich sort of thing, very much based on food as well, like The Menu and everything, about a chef. And I guess I won't say much more about where it goes, but it's pretty fun. It's like a pretty fun thriller thing where some morally grey things happen and some people may be quite disturbed by it. It's not exactly graphic in terms of content on screen, but some of the implications and stuff is pretty fucked up. And yeah, I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. Then I watched a movie called The Group, which is about like a support group, and it's a horror movie, so they start getting killed and stuff. I don't know. I don't remember that much about it because I didn't really like it and I don't care, so whatever. Then I watched Immaculate, which is the Sydney Sweeney horror movie, in which apparently she took a huge part in terms of producing it and actually getting this thing made. Apparently she had wanted to get it made for like a decade or so, but I don't know, the funding or whatever, she was having trouble with it or something. So apparently the story goes that she made Madam Web, she was in Madam Web, so that she could get in good words with whoever it was that she needed to, so that she could make Immaculate. And with that being said, Immaculate is immaculate, I guess. I don't know. I don't think it's like the most perfect film ever or whatever, but it is better than I was expecting it to be. I thought it looked like a very generic religious horror film, which isn't exactly my subgenre, but as I watched it, it got crazier than I was expecting, and I thought it was really well done for what it was, and she was definitely the best part of the film. Then I also watched Thelma, which is kind of like this anti-action movie about an old lady going on this mission to get money back from people that scammed her online. And so basically it's shot like an action movie where she might, I don't know, walk across the room and there'll be like intense action music or something, and the whole thing is just kind of ironic in that way. It's kind of like innocent and fun, and I enjoy it. Then I watched Last Straw, which is a horror thriller set at a diner, mostly set within one night, and it's really well done, told out of chronological order. I think it's one of the better films of the year. Then I watched The First Omen, which is basically immaculate, but in my opinion, not as good. I think that's the unpopular opinion, but I probably would have liked whichever movie I watched first. I watched them both the same night, and that was probably a disservice to The First Omen, because if I watched The First Omen before Immaculate, I probably would be saying this the other way around. I don't know. Anyway, then I watched It Ends With Us, which is the movie with Blake Lively in it. It's based on a book by Colleen Hoover as the author. I listened to the audiobook a few years ago. I think the story is quite interesting. I was looking forward to this movie, actually. I wanted to see how it was depicted, on screen and stuff. I don't think it's like the best movie of all time, but I do think it's getting unfairly kind of judged. People, I don't know, I think a lot of people look at this and they think it's like a Hallmark movie or something like that, just because it's sort of a romance with a love triangle and stuff. I don't know, a lot of people look at that kind of thing and automatically think, that's tacky bullshit, I want no part to do with it. But I think it's kind of more respectable than that. I think it's well done and it's fairly solid. I'm not in love with this movie, but I think it deserves some defense, to be honest. I think it's better than it gets credit for. Then I also watched Greedy People, which is a Joseph Gordon-Levitt movie that is basically like a long episode of the TV show Fargo, where it's just about a bunch of people who kind of keep double-crossing each other and all have their own motivations and are all after the same kind of thing and stuff, and it's just like this crime story, but it's also sort of comedic and stuff, and I like it a lot. Then I watched The Crossover Express, which is a short that you can just watch on YouTube, basically about being able to contact the dead, and it's very well done, but my only issue with this is basically that Talk to Me exists, and this is basically Talk to Me, but not as good, unfortunately. Still good, still worth checking out, but Talk to Me is like the far superior version of this story, if you ask me. Then there's The Big Take, which is another short on YouTube, which is very, very basic. There's basically no story to it, but it's shot very well. That's what I remember about it. Then there's also The Loop, which same can be said. It's a very generic kind of story about how monotonous day-to-day life is, but it's shot and edited very well with the sound design and stuff, and that really elevates it. Then I watched It's What's Inside, which is kind of like this, I guess it's a thriller comedy that sort of leans on sci-fi as well. I won't give away the exact premise, but I will say it's basically like a moment that happens in the Scooby-Doo movie. I'll just say that as a little hint. And with that being said, this is a movie that you really got to pay attention to keep track of what's going on. It's very entertaining in that kind of way, as the movie really doesn't slow down or hold your hand for you, which I appreciate. Then I watched Strange Darling, which is a horror movie that really hit pretty big this year, at least among like cinephiles and stuff. It's a popular movie on Letterboxd, and I think it definitely deserves it. It kind of turns the slasher genre, kind of on its head a little bit backwards. It's a little bit of a subversion of what you typically might see. Then I watched The Platform 2 on Netflix, and this was not nearly as good as the original film. Weirdly enough, this movie kind of expects you to remember everything about the original, and I absolutely did not. Sorry, The Platform 2. But even if I did, I'm not sure. There's something really lacking about this movie where it just didn't really get its point across to me. I just didn't care about what was going on, really. And look, the point, as I just said, is a very obvious one, as it's literally about a platform of food that goes down and all the people at the top eat it before all the people at the bottom can, and basically it's about the, opportunity and betraying each other and stuff, and if everybody just ate fairly and stuff, everybody could, live fairly and good and all that stuff, and it's about society in that way. But I don't know. 1 told that story, and 2 is just an unnecessary addition to it, and I try and make it more complex, but it just muddles things up, and it's like, what are you even doing anymore? I don't know. 2 kind of sucked. Then I watched The Simpsons Most Wonderful Time of the Year short, which is just a fucking 2-minute song. This really shouldn't count as a movie, but it was on Letterboxd, and I wanted to pump up my numbers. That being said, same can be said for the next 2. I watched How It Feels scrolling through Netflix Top 10, which is just a YouTube sketch comedy video, but it's fantastic. Highly recommend it. As goes the same thing for When You Accidentally Select Meat at Door. The YouTube channel that made both of these is called Almost Friday, and they're very similar to That's a Bad Idea, who I mentioned before. I like That's a Bad Idea a bit more, but these guys are really good as well. Then I watched a movie called Stream, which is this horror movie that kind of promises to be like a slasher movie in the digital era, but it's really just kind of dumb. I don't know. It's supposed to be about this deadly game going on across this big hotel, basically, among some of the people who are staying there, as it's been sort of abandoned. They're all isolated, and there's masked killers coming to kill them, and they're supposed to be recording the whole thing and streaming it, but that's really barely an emphasis, and I'm not sure. It just feels very low budget and not great. I didn't enjoy it very much at all. Then I watched The Wild Robot, which is the best Pixar movie that's come out in years, but it's not been made by Pixar. It's a DreamWorks movie, and it's basically just this very adorable movie. And I will recite to you what I wrote for my Letterboxd review, which was, my oh my, this movie is about a goose that learns to fly. Why oh why did this robot movie make me cry? And it's just poetry right there, and very true. Oh my god. This movie, makes you feel things. Then I watched Woman of the Hour, which is Anna Kendrick's directorial debut, and I thought it was mixed. I thought that it was well done in terms of how it was shot and everything, but I had trouble with sort of the depiction of what was going on, where it was supposed to be about the experiences of the women who were victims of this real-life serial killer. But the thing is, because it was about multiple women and it showed their stories kind of through the eyes of the serial killer, who turned out to be the through line because he was the common denominator throughout all the scenes, it kind of turned him into the main character, and it sort of made it look like it was dismissive of the women, and they were really there just to be killed, as we followed along this male killer for the entirety of the movie. It kind of felt like it was doing the opposite of what it was trying to, and it was what it was criticizing, if that makes any sense. And I know that's not what it was trying to do, but it felt weirdly misogynistic. I know that it's not, those weren't the intentions, but it's just it dehumanized the women as just victims, as it kind of showed this man doing what he was doing, I guess. And I felt kind of weird about that, I guess, and I thought that that was sort of taking away from what it was trying to do. Apart from that, I'll also say that I think the storylines were kind of muddled in terms of so the story, the overall hook is that the serial killer guy went on this reality TV show. I think it's in the 60s, but it ends up feeling like that's kind of just a side quest between him killing a bunch of women. It's just kind of a weird, odd tone that gets mixed up with all the other things that are going on, and it's a few different movies in one. For that reason, I didn't exactly love it. Then I watched Time Cut, which is another movie that I did not love at all, but I don't want to criticize it too harshly because I'm just not the target audience. See, when I first heard about a slasher movie that's also also about time travel and stuff. I got super excited. I'm like, that is up my alley. If this is anything like Happy Death Day or even Totally Killer, this was definitely going to be a movie for me. But unfortunately, it ends up just being a very, very, very tame version of those. It's really aimed at tweens, I guess. It's really for like teenage girls. And so I'm not exactly the target audience, and it ended up being a lot more basic than I wanted it to be. It ended up trying to be emotional, but in a very shallow way. And there was just a lot about it that didn't really work for me. But again, I just don't think it was really made for me. And that being said, I do think that it would be a good sort of introductory horror movie for people just getting into it. Kind of like a gateway horror movie, you know? And so that's really not the worst thing. Then I also watched My Old Ass, and I think I can say the same for that too, where it just didn't really feel like it was made for me either. I don't know. It's another movie with sort of a time travel element to it that really intrigued me with the premise, but it doesn't really use that premise to its full potential in my opinion, and it's more just about the dramedy of, again, this teenage girl that I didn't super relate to, and I didn't fully enjoy it, but I think whoever it is for, it is done well, and so I don't want to completely shit on it. I just didn't enjoy it that much myself. And 3 in a row, I also watched Space Cadet, which was quite different than I thought it was going to be as well. I thought this was going to be sort of like a true story, an inspirational story about somebody who maybe doesn't meet the typical qualifications but made it into NASA anyway. But instead, it's actually a fictional comedy about this girly girl in NASA, and it's meant to be a comedy, but it is painfully unfunny. The whole thing is so cringe and bad. And again, maybe I'm just not the target audience, so I don't want to say too much, but I'm like, fuck this movie, but I fucking hated it to be honest. So yeah, if you are anything like me or share my tastes at all, avoid Space Cadet. Then I watched Brothers, which is the Peter Dinklage, Josh Brolin movie where they are brothers, and I thought this was going to be really on the nose, low-hanging fruit stuff where it's like twins, where they're like, isn't it so funny that these two guys who look nothing alike are brothers? But they really didn't touch upon that at all, really, and just kind of sold that these guys were brothers and didn't really mention the, size of them, which I liked. I really love when Peter Dinklage is in a movie and that side of things doesn't get mentioned at all and he's just treated like a human being. I think that's nice. Anyway, but apart from that, it's a pretty generic, just comedy road trip movie, and it's okay. I'm not crazy about it. I'll probably never watch or think about it again, but it was okay for what it was to pass the time while I watched. Then I also watched Assemble, Deadpool and Wolverine behind the scenes documentary on Disney Plus, which was kind of interesting. All these are fairly well done, and I've watched most of them now, I think. Then I watched Alien Romulus. This was one that I'd been meaning to catch up on for months, and I gotta say, it's probably the Alien movie I've enjoyed most. I'm not a huge fan of the whole franchise. I find the original kind of bland. Aliens is pretty sick, but again, it's not one of my favorite movies or anything. Alien 3 I just watched for the first time recently, and it was okay. I don't really get everybody's hatred for it. I know David Fincher, it became in the edit not exactly the movie he had envisioned, so he hates it. But apart from that, I don't get why the general public seem to hate it. It's kind of fine. Yeah, but anyway, Alien Romulus though is a much more modern version of these alien stories, and I think it was pretty good. Then I watched We Live in a Time, and I should not have watched this shit, I tell you that much. In terms of what I've been going through, in terms of personal stuff, We Live in a Time made me get up in my head and think about things, and I was having a bad time watching it. That being said, it's a very good movie. Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh are really good in it, not a surprise, but yeah, gets you feeling some certain things where if you're in my position, it was kind of a negative. But anyway, that's just my personal experience. Then I watched the Juror 2, which is supposedly Clint Eastwood's final directed film, which is kind of sad, especially given the fact that when you watch Juror 2, he's still on his game, man. He has not lost his edge or anything. This is a great movie. Yes, it does feel a bit like it's aimed at old people, and so it's a bit of a slow burn. It's a courtroom drama, that just kind of comes with the territory. But that being said, it's very interesting. As you watch the main character, who has been called in for jury duty, have to be part of a jury where he realizes that he might be the culprit who did the crime that the person who is being potentially charged is being charged for. And so it's just really watching this guy feel guilty for an hour and a half. And it's very interesting, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. Then I watched Saturday Night, which is the movie about Saturday Night Live's first opening night that they ever did back in the 70s. Japanese or something like that. And basically I wanted to watch this movie because I've always been interested in Saturday Night Live as a show, but it never really aired here in Australia growing up, so I really missed out on watching it. I've seen clips on YouTube, of course, and I really like some of the stuff by guys like Bill Hader and Andy Samberg, and I've watched full episodes recently because now they are streaming in Australia, at least the newer episodes, and any of those that I've watched so far have been quite terrible. I think the modern day SNL episodes of what I've seen are objectively bad and very unfunny, so I don't know if it's always been like that. I don't know if it's hit or miss or whatever. I'm not that familiar with Saturday Night Live, so I kind of wanted to gain some insight. That's why I watched it, and as I was watching it, it was kind of interesting to see some of the people who I knew their sort of origin stories, but I really did not know many of them at all, and some of them just by name. Like, I know Chevy Chase because he's in Community, I know Dan Aykroyd because he's in Ghostbusters, and I know the name of John Belushi, but I don't really know who he is. Apart from that, I don't really know any of these people, like classic comedians, I guess, but I don't know who they are. And so for that reason, for being unfamiliar with them, for not really knowing the comedians involved and stuff, I just didn't really get a lot of insight through this. Maybe it wasn't made for me. I'm not somebody who is super into Saturday Night Live, I suppose, so I'm missing that context, and it just made me not really enjoy this movie that much at all. I like the premise in terms of it being pretty much shot in like real time. I find that interesting. I always enjoy that sort of premise, but yeah, I don't know. This movie was pretty to me, and I didn't understand some of the humor. There's this part where I think his name is Andy Kaufman. He's the guy who Jim Carrey played in Man on the Moon, I think, which I've never seen either. But they show one of his classic Saturday Night Live comedy bits where he puts on a song and he starts lip singing to it every so often. And I guess the joke is it's meant to be funny because while he's not doing the lip singing, he's nervous, and then he goes all confident and stuff when he sings. But it's not funny. It's just not funny. And I watched the version in the movie, I compared it to the original of the actual guy, and I watched the Jim Carrey version of it, and none of them are funny, and I don't understand it. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. So I don't know. It was fine, I guess. Then I watched Wolves, which is the movie with Brad Pitt and what's his name, George Clooney, and basically they're like cleaner guys of like crimes and stuff where they get rid of problems, and it's like a comedy as well, and I liked it. I also watched The Instigators the very same day, the one with Matt Damon and Casey Affleck, and these are like almost the exact same movies, except in that they're robbers, not cleanup guys or whatever, but it's very much like the exact same thing. It's like kind of action crime comedy movie that's fine. Alright, now we're up to older movies. First up in July, I watched The Descent 2, which I wasn't a huge fan of, but I also didn't really like the first one all that much either, sorry. Then I watched The Bone Collector, which is a Denzel Washington, Angelina Jolie movie where they are like detectives. It's very much akin to like Silence of the Lambs, but nowhere near as good as Silence of the Lambs. There is a very funny part, I guess. Probably shouldn't describe it that way, but there is a part that made me laugh where Denzel Washington he's playing a paralyzed man in a hospital bed, right? And basically he beats up the bad guy in his with his hospital bed. Like, how much of a pathetic bad guy do you have to be to get beat up by a paralyzed man in a hospital bed with his bed? I don't know, it tickled me a little bit. Then I watched Whiplash, the original short, not the feature-length film by Damien Chazelle, and it was really interesting watching this in a slightly different context in that way and learn a little bit about where Whiplash sort of came from. And that being said, I actually think I like J.K. Simmons' performance in this short more than the full feature-length film. Is that insane? Probably, but kind of felt that way, yeah. Then I watched Fantastic Four 2, the 2007 film, Rise of the Silver Surfer or whatever, which was fun. I watched The Jester, which is like this very low-budget sort of rip-off version of Art the Clown and Terrifier on Amazon Prime, and it's pretty bad, sorry. Then I watched Trunk, Locked In, which is the movie with the worst title that I will say in this entire list, I would say, but it's about a woman who is in a trunk, locked in a trunk. And basically it's very much like that Halle Berry movie from 2013 called The Call, where it's just about this woman on the phone with people trying to get out of her predicament as she's in the back of this car getting kidnapped or whatever. Exact same premise, not as good as The Call, I would say. Though most people don't care for The Call that much. I have nostalgia for it. I like that movie quite a bit. So yeah. Next up is Relax, I'm from the Future. This is a Rhys Darby comedy where it's a man who comes from the future into the past, and he knows certain things about the future and how like things are going to go bad and stuff, but he's not really focusing on that. He's kind of just like making sure certain little things happen, and aside from that, it's kind of just a hangout movie where it's a fish out of water thing, this guy just living in the past. Then I watched The Mask, the 2023 short, not The Mask with Jim Carrey. This is more of a I guess you would call it mockumentary that you can watch on YouTube, very much in the same sort of context as the movie Spree. And basically it's about this kind of sad guy who is desperate for fame and success, but who is clearly not really got it. He doesn't have the it factor, if that makes any sense. And so you can see him clearly trying and failing. It feels very relatable in some certain ways, unfortunately. It's kind of sad, and it's very interesting to watch as this guy just goes further and further down the rabbit hole of just kind of trying to sell himself, basically. I found it really interesting. Then I watched a short called The Chair. This is also by That's a Bad Idea. I also watched Warnings, Enigma, which I think was my favorite of these, Heavy Eyes, and We Don't Feel Pain, We Tried a Ritual. These are all That's a Bad Idea YouTube videos, so if you want to count them as movies or not, that's up to you, but they're all on Letterboxd, so I counted them, and I thought they were all really good. Then I watched Rec 3 Genesis, which is a found footage movie that has nothing to do really with Rec 1 and 2, but I guess is part of that franchise. And this one is basically like a zombie found footage movie, but it's set at a wedding, and I thought it was pretty fun. I'm not usually into found footage movies all that much, but this was on the better side if you ask me. Then I watched aforementioned Alien 3, which I thought was okay. Then I watched The Imposter, which is a documentary about this guy who kind of preys on families of people who have lost their children, and basically he pretends to be the lost children, and he's an imposter. He pretends to be them so that he can get, I guess, support and attention. I'm not really sure what his end game is, but basically it's about this guy who, he's older and he pretends to be younger boys and really take advantage of these sort of grieving families who probably are easier to convince because of their desperation for wanting their children back, I assume. But I also did watch, and as it went along, kept thinking to myself just how far-fetched it was as it went along, and I was kind of like, really? You believe this guy? Like, he's not exactly a mastermind here, and everybody seems to be buying into his shit, cops included, all the, like, child services people, and just all these kinds of things. Like, everybody's believing him, but I just don't understand why. And so, by the end of it, I kind of just felt like everybody was kind of an idiot. He just didn't look like him. So it's absurd, I would say, to have believed any of it. But it's very interesting to see how he pulled it off. And so it's fairly good. Then I also watched Brainwash Sex Camera Power documentary. This is basically about a lot of like modern media and how it kind of portrays men and women and the difference between that and how it sexualizes women, even in sort of like everyday media. Not just highly sexualized things, but like normal, PG rated kind of shit where there's like certain angles and stuff where they sexualize women in kind of sneaky ways in some ways that you might not notice at first. And it really opened my eyes to a lot of media and how it does kind of sexualize, portray women and stuff in kind of unfair ways, I would say. And I found this overly pretty damn interesting. Then I also watched a movie called The Conference, which is a horror comedy, a foreign language speaking film. I don't remember what country it's from, but basically it's about a group of work people going to like a work conference or whatever. They're going to stay at like a campground to like learn to work together or whatever. And there's a masked killer and whatever. And it's really not as funny as it should be, and it's not as much as a like tense horror movie as it should be. It's just kind of nothing. It's kind of fine. I don't know. Then I watched Dragged Across Concrete, which is the Mel Gibson, Vince Vaughn movie. Basically it's about these two cops who have been suspended because of something wrong that they do, basically. And from then on, as they're off duty, they find out about a crime that's going to be taking place, and they trail along with that crime and try and stop it, even though really they shouldn't, and it's not their responsibility. But then again, if they're not going to, who is? And it kind of becomes this whole morally questionable situation about what should be done here, as they're also going after money that's involved here too. And it's very much a slow burn and a very serious film, but it's also something that it's a very enjoyable watch, I would say. I thought it was quite flawless, if I'm being honest. I don't know if I'm being way too like nice to it or whatever, but I thought this was a pretty amazing movie. It's directed by the same guy that made Brawl in Cell Block 99 and Bone Tomahawk. And with that being said, I think this guy is a little bit icky politically, but I'm not 100% sure. And with that, I would say that with that and also the Mel Gibson appearance and stuff, I can see how this would be off-putting to to certain people, but the filmmaking itself, I think, makes up for it, and I think it's a damn good movie, so I don't know, separate art and the artist and whatever. Then I watched a movie called Nothing to Hide. Yeah, it's a foreign language speaking film about a group of adult friends who are like a bunch of couples and stuff who meet up for a dinner, and they come up with a game to basically put their phones in the middle of the dinner table and all have a look when they get texts or emails or whatever and answer them together. And basically this leads to arguments and cheating accusations and this and that and all that kind of stuff for something that was clearly never a good idea to begin with, and people get hurt and all this kind of stuff. And it's maybe not as good as that sounds. Like, it is an interesting premise that I would say goes in some directions I didn't love, but it was still overall kind of enjoyable. I wanted to see where it led. It's a dumb idea to do in real life, but watching with no stakes through a screen was kind of fun. Then I watched Pretending I'm a Superman, a documentary about the Tony Hawk skateboarding video game series. And this was quite a letdown, to be honest, because it really wasn't as insightful as I was hoping it would be. It was really just a bunch of people from either the video game industry or more so the skateboarding industry talking about how influential the game was over and over and over and over again, over and over. They just keep repeating the same sort of talking points over and over again. They talk about how the skateboarding culture in the 90s was different, and when the games came out, it kind of changed everything, and, you know, Tony Hawk is such a cool guy and whatever and whatever. And they just keep saying, like, they keep reiterating the same points over and over again, and it kind of just feels like this repetitive thing where it's just like, why am I still sitting here listening to the same shit? Like, I don't know. I found it a bit disappointing given that I'm so interested in the subject matter. That part, you know, kind of sucked. Then I watched the Amityville Horror, the 2005 version with Ryan Reynolds. I'd been meaning to watch this for years. I'd never seen it before somehow, and it was fine. Then I watched The Pope's Exorcist, which is the Russell Crowe movie where he is the Pope's exorcist, I guess. This movie is quite silly, and I appreciated that it kind of leaned into that campy side of things. And yeah, I had fun with it. I'm not super into religious horror movies, as I mentioned before, but if you're upfront about what you are and you're not afraid to lean into the silly and stuff, yeah, I don't know, I can enjoy it. Then I watched Fear Farm with a PH, Fear Farm. This is about a group of teenagers who go to like a cornfield maze kind of place, but like a horror haunted house Halloween version. And basically they enter this maze with the challenge of if they get out, they win money or whatever. But it turns out that, oh no, it's a deadly game and there's killers after them and whatever. Very generic, very much that kind of thing, but it still sounded fun. It sounded like the kind of thing I would enjoy even if it's not like fantastic. That being said, not really. I didn't really like any part of this. It was pretty shit. Then I watched VHS 85, and for some reason I keep returning to this franchise and regretting it pretty much every single time, except when I watched, is it 94? I've got the Blu-ray. 94. 94 is the only VHS movie that I've really liked all the way through. Other than that, every single one of them is much more miss than hit. I think I like maybe one segment in each of the films, maybe on average, and it might even be less than that, as in I don't like any of them. I don't really like found footage movies all that much, but with VHS, it often feels like maybe there's an interesting premise and then it just gets cut short before anything good happens anyway. And if that, because a lot of the time I don't think there's a good premise either. And it's just shot shittily with shaky cam and everything. You can hardly see what's going on. I kind of fucking hate these movies. So anyway, I watched 85 and same can be said. There's no difference here. It's fine, I guess. The first segment's okay. Then it gets cut short before anything interesting happens. Then the rest of the segments are not that good at all, really. I kind of hate this movie. I hate them all. Then I watched Babylon, which is another Damien Chazelle movie. This is the one that came out just a couple years ago with Margot Robbie, Brad Pitt, a bunch of other people. And basically it's about the rich excess lives of the people who made talkies back in like the 1920s or whatever. Basically, yeah, it's about the silent film era as the sort of new, like I said, the movies with sound, the talkies or whatever, are starting to get introduced, and how the people who are not used to that have a very hard time adjusting to this new kind of era of media. And I found that really interesting. The only thing is, I really hated like the first hour of this movie. It's like a 3-hour movie, and the first fucking whole part is just like about the excess of these rich people's lives as they're all partying and having orgies and taking drugs and shit. And I just didn't find any of that interesting. I did not care. They get an elephant at one point and take it into this party, and like obviously it's not ethical and stuff, and then the fucking the elephant shits all over a guy or whatever, and whoops. It's meant to be the funniest thing ever, but it's just like not. It's just fucking stupid. But once you get past that part, the rest is good. Then I watched Lords of Chaos, which is maybe one of the most disturbing movies I've ever seen. It's about a Norwegian black metal band, I guess called Mayhem, and they're real life people. And some of these real life people killed other real life people. And it's just horrible. The whole movie is basically just watching these edgelord incels trying to one-up each other all the way throughout, where they're like, look how fucked up this is. If I cut my arm open and bleed all over like the crowd or whatever, isn't that cool? And then somebody else tries to one-up that, and like, I don't know, some of them, one of the guys kills animals and shit. They're just doing the most fucked up stuff for no real reason. They have no philosophy behind it. They're just a bunch of dumbasses doing dark shit for no real reason. And it's infuriating to watch. That being said, it's a good film, I would say. And then where it leads to is like actual murders and stuff as well. Like, it just keeps escalating as things get worse and worse. And it's a very interesting kind of dark path as you watch these characters kind of progress through that. And yeah, it's really horrible and frustrating, and yeah, not good dudes in real life, but makes for a good movie. Then I watched Vivarium, which is a Jesse Eisenberg movie about how the suburbs are actually hell, and modern suburbia is the worst and a hellhole. And it's just all a metaphor for that, as this couple find themselves in this kind of like supernatural suburbia that they can never leave. And it's pretty boring, and most of the time Jesse Eisenberg is digging a hole outside. That's what's going on in the movie a lot of the time, to be honest. Then I watched 1 Minute Time Machine, which is another short on YouTube you can watch that's basically the prototype for About Time. I don't think that's on camera, but anyway, the point is, I've got About Time up there, the Blu-ray, and yeah, this is kind of like a cute little short about a guy who's trying to talk to a woman at like a park bench and romance her or whatever, and every time he screws up, he goes back in time to try again, and it's just kind of like this cute thing that takes a little bit of a dark turn that you might not see coming, and it's clever. I like it. Then I watched Slaughterhouse, which is a movie about a killer sloth who kills a bunch of sorority girls, and it's as dumb as it sounds, and I still thought it might be up my alley because of that, but it's not that good. Sorry if that's a huge surprise to you that Slaughterhouse isn't good, but yeah. Then I watched Bingo Hell, which is a horror comedy, or at least tries to be, but it's not really funny, it's not really horrific, it's just kind of nothing. Then I watched Unseen, which is a movie about a blind girl who finds herself getting like kidnapped by her toxic ex-boyfriend or whatever, and she's trying to escape from him in the woods. As she does so, she calls somebody by random who is kind of like talking on camera phone, and she's kind of trying to describe to the blind girl where to go and how to escape and stuff, and it's like teamwork as they work together to escape from this bad situation. But the girl who is doing the instructions is also at her job at a convenience store, and there's shit going on at her job while the killer stuff is going on, which is a very funny comparison. Like, there's this part where the slushy kind of like Slurpee, whatever you call it, machine is starting to overflow and bubble up, and so like it's actually portrayed as almost even stakes, where like the woman in the shop is almost as concerned about that as she is for this blind girl's life. I don't know, it's very funny. Then I watched Two Heads Creek, which is an Australian horror comedy movie, but it's very generic, and it's very much like, it's one of those movies that sets up like, oh, in this small town something horrible's going on, but you know what's going on the entire time. But then it takes like the whole fucking movie to get to the point and to explain what's going on. By the time you get there, you're like, I know, movie. Like, you're not the first to do this plot. You're not the first. Why do you think you're like this ingenious thing? I don't want to be too mean to it. It's obviously like a low budget film and everything, but it's just like so tedious to watch, in my opinion. And it's also not very funny. And it also leans way too hard into like Australian stereotypes and stuff. And it just grates me. These sorts of characters just annoy the fuck out of me. Anyway, then I watched Grand Piano, which is a, what's his name? Edger. Fuck. What's his name? Lord of the Rings man. Elijah Wood. It's an Elijah Wood movie, and basically he's like a classical pianist, and he's playing at like this orchestra or whatever, but he gets a call from a crazy killer or whatever who says, if you get one note wrong, you're gonna die. Dun, dun, dun. And basically it's just like this silly thriller where he has to get every note right, but he can keep leaving the concert constantly and stuff. It was a bit unrealistic in that way, but it's like a nice tight thriller that I enjoyed anyway. Then I watched Cabin Fever, the original Eli Roth 2002 film, I believe, about a sort of killer virus that you can catch that is like, eats your skin alive, basically. And with that being said, it's kind of like a good horror concept in terms of not actually having like malevolent villain, but just having like this horrible disease instead. And that part's a little bit unique about it. But apart from that, it's also taken back by a lot of bad comedy that's dated over the years. And I don't know, I'm not crazy about this movie. Then I watched All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, which is a movie, I guess. I don't know. It was fine. Then I watched Relic, which is a movie that takes its sweet ass time getting to the point, but when it does, it's well worth it. And it's actually a really good movie, it turns out. Then I watched Black Friday, which is a Bruce Campbell horror comedy about Black Friday, like the Thanksgiving sale or whatever. He works at like, I would say JB Hi-Fi, but I guess it's like Best Buy or whatever, like an entertainment store or whatever. And it's like a horror movie. I don't know what else to say about it. It's fine. Then I watched Bug, which is a Michael Shannon movie about a couple who get kind of holed up in a hotel room, paranoid as they think bugs are in the room, and they keep talking about conspiracy theories and kind of just get a little bit crazy as they're cooped up inside. But the actual movie during its first half is quite a bit different than what I've just described there, and it's more of a rom-com a little bit at the start. And I thought that part was actually a lot more interesting than when it finally delves into that kind of latter part that I just described there. I didn't really care about the second half, to be honest, but before that I kind of enjoyed, so take that how you will. Then I watched a movie called Dear David, which is about a BuzzFeed cartoonist named Adam Ellis. You probably know him if you have spent time on the internet. But basically it's meant to be like this true story of like this ghost boy haunting this internet celebrity's apartment, and it's very badly done. Then I watched Hot Girls Wanted on Netflix. This is a documentary that delves into the adult film industry and basically shows you how young women are exploited and kind of tricked into joining the adult industry. Basically, this movie focuses solely on this one pimp guy who basically sets out to recruit young girls on Craigslist, whatever you call it. In Australia, we say Craig. In America, they say Craig. And I guess it's an American website, so I'll say Craigslist, even though I hate it. Anyway, but yeah, so it's about this guy who basically, hires these women to go off to various shoots with different porn studios and stuff. And basically, it just shows how sickening and dehumanizing it can be when put into context. In terms of like, there's this one part where after one of the girls shoots various videos for this guy, she goes back home to her parents, and you kind of see her in that different context with her parents, and you see that she's just like this 18-year-old girl, and it's kind of sickening. You're like, she's just a girl. It's kind of horrible in that way. It's eye-opening, and it puts things into perspective in that way. That being said, I didn't think that this movie was as scathing as it possibly could and should have been, and it was more limited in its kind of storytelling, and it felt like it didn't have as much access as it should have to really efficiently tell the story that it was trying to, because it was really only about this one like pimp guy or whatever, and it didn't really delve into many other perspectives, which I thought was a little bit mishandled. I thought that it should have shown a little bit more than just that, and I feel like it should have been handled better in terms of not showing explicit content and kind of participating in the exploitation of these girls that the film is trying to criticize, which it felt like it was doing some of that time, which frustrated me because I know that wasn't the intentions, but it just felt like, okay, now you're kind of dehumanizing these girls as well, the documentary itself, and that was kind of annoying to me. But overall, it was interesting, eye-opening. I think it's worth a watch, and it's still relevant to today, even a decade after it's been made. Even though like the porn industry has changed over the years, I still think this film is probably an important watch, but I also think that there would probably be better ones out there. Then I watched Smiley Face Killers, which I guess is about smiley face killers. I don't know. It's not really a huge emphasis, and it's bad. This movie fucking sucks. Then I watched Beware of Dog, which is basically about 3 different people who are linked in some small way, but it's all about these young people in their 20s' lives and just navigating various challenges. There's one guy who's like a boxer or whatever, and he's dealing with a breakup. There's another girl who has discovered that she has OCD. That's why I decided to watch this film. And yeah, it's just, there's various struggles going on, and it's kind of interesting. It's very much a very indie, obscure film. There's like less than 100 ratings for this movie on Letterboxd, so absolutely nobody's fucking seen it at all. So this is definitely my hipster show-off pick. But I liked it. I thought it was a good watch, but nothing happens. It's very uneventful, and I don't know. I appreciated it more than I enjoyed watching it, I suppose. Then I watched Weird Al Yankovic, the Weird Al Yankovic story, the Daniel Radcliffe movie that came out a few years ago. And I thought it was okay, but I did a bit of a disservice to it by watching it straight after I watched watched Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story that same night, which was far superior. So that kind of sucks for Weird Al, because in comparison, it was not nearly as good. Still fun though. Then I watched Game Changer, the Legacy of Saw behind the scenes documentary. I got the big fancy box set of the first 9 Saw films, and so I was going through watching some of the behind the scenes and commentaries and stuff, and just having a bit of fun with that, watching certain things and learning stuff about the series that I hadn't actually seen before. So, you know, as a big fan of Saw, that was kind of like important to me, I suppose. I plan to watch the rest. I hadn't watched all of it yet, but yeah, there's like 10 discs or something in this big collection and everything, so there's a lot of content there. Then I watched Barbarians, not Barbarian, Barbarians, and this has the dude who plays Ramsay Bolton from Game of Thrones in it, and basically it's about these 2 couples who meet up for dinner, and it's a horror film where some bad things happen. But that being said, it takes a long time to get to that, and I would say, honestly, legitimately, not even exaggerating, I think this may be the most boring movie I've ever seen in my life. And it seemed very up my alley, being like a horror comedy or whatever, but man, it's weak on both those factors. Then I watched House on Haunted Hill, which I believe is from 1959 or something. Vincent Price is the sort of main guy. I'd never seen a movie with him before, and I'd hardly seen a movie from this era. Like, this is one of the oldest movies I've ever seen, and so, yay, let's applaud me for giving something old a try and enjoying it. I liked this movie. It helped that it only went for like just over an hour, but it really didn't drag. Some of the kind of effects and stuff were a bit dated, but it actually kind of makes sense in universe. There's a good reason for them to look sort of bad, so that part's actually more forgivable than I even thought. And I don't know, it's just like a fun little Halloween movie. I like it quite a bit actually, and I might even rewatch it at some point. Then I watched Shame, which is the movie with Michael Fassbender. It's about basically sex addiction, and I thought it was really interesting watching this person deal with a very unique struggle that you wouldn't normally see depicted in media, really. This isn't the kind of movie I would make like a video about or anything, but I did write up a little thing on Letterboxd and stuff. If you want to hear some more of my thoughts, you can look that up. Then I watched Curve, which is a short you can watch on YouTube about a woman who wakes up on like a curved, slanted piece of cement as she's about to like fall off very close to her death, as there's like a cliff right over the other side. And this is pretty much nothing for like 10 minutes, and I don't know, it was fine, I guess, but I didn't enjoy it all that much. Then I watched Migration, which is a movie about ducks migrating, and it's cute, but it's also an Illumination film, which means it's a bit dumb. You know, they go for a lot of easy jokes, and it's definitely not on Pixar's level, I guess is what I'll say. It's definitely not on the Wild Robots level, I would say, either. Similar, because, you know, they're about ducks and geese and whatever, so similar, but not nearly as good. Then I watched Confess Fletch, which is the John Hamm comedy where he plays like a detective or whatever. I guess this is a remake of some old movies that I'd never really heard of before, and it was okay. I don't know, it's not really made for me, I suppose, probably more for older people who know the original or whatever, but you know, it had some funny moments. Then I watched Drinking Buddies, which is a Jake Johnson, Olivia Wilde movie. Anna Kendrick is in it, but yeah, basically this is just a dramedy that's very much like a, what are they called? Mumblecore movie, where it's basically very grounded, very close to real life, just naturalistic conversations and all that stuff. If that's your thing, it's enjoyable enough, I guess, but it's definitely nothing mind-blowing. Then I watched Olympus Has Fallen with my dad, and this and Gladiator, most dad movies ever. Yeah, definitely had fun watching this, although if I didn't watch it with my dad, I probably would have turned it off because who gives a shit, but watching with my dad was fun. Then I watched Halloween 6, which was the only Halloween movie that I had not seen before, and you know, I've been putting it off because it's not streaming. I can't find just like the DVD or Blu-ray just by itself anywhere, and so I hadn't seen it. For years, I just like couldn't see it. But I finally gave in and rented it on YouTube because I could have done that the entire time. I just didn't want to pay to rent it. But I gave in, I watched it, and now I can say I've seen all the Halloween movies. Yay. Was it worth it? To say that, yes, but just on Halloween 6 alone, its merit? No, it's not a very good movie. Then I watched Benjamin Button for the first time, and I could not believe that this is a David Fincher movie. I guess I always knew that because it was one of David Fincher's movies that I always had to see but had never seen before. But when you're watching it, it feels so much more like a Robert Zemeckis, maybe a Steven Spielberg movie. It's way too wholesome and like corny and stuff, you know? It doesn't have the kind of like modern edge to it that a lot of David Fincher's movies have. It doesn't have like the sleek surgical-esque style of like Gone Girl. It doesn't have the cynicism of Seven. It doesn't have like the punk edgy attitude of Fight Club. It doesn't have his personality to it at all. It's way too just sincere. So it's strange that it's come from him, but I would say it's pretty good still. Then I watched The Mummy from 2017, the Tom Cruise one. And it was fine, but there was this one moment I want to point out that was funny because there's a scene where he's fighting Russell Crowe, who was also in this movie, and Russell Crowe says something like, hey, you may be a younger man than me, but, you know, I'm tough, or whatever he says, I don't know. But basically the point is, he says, you may be a younger man than me. And the funny thing about that is, I looked it up, and it turns out that Tom Cruise is actually 2 years older than Russell Crowe. Then I watched Warrior, the Tom Hardy, Joel Edgerton movie about MMA fighting, and man, this is just a really fucking good movie. If you like Rocky and haven't for some reason seen Warrior, do it. It's great. Then I watched Changing Lanes, which is a early 2000s movie with Ben Affleck and Samuel L. Jackson. Basically, it's about these two guys who get into a minor car accident and kind of fuck up the rest of their day, and they turn out to be like the most important days of their lives or whatever. And so it turns into a much bigger conflict than it should have. Like, the car crash made it so that Samuel L. Jackson makes it late to his appointment where he's talking with his wife about the custody of his kids in their divorce. So basically, he loses custody and all this stuff. So that's like a huge issue. And then Ben Affleck on his side, he's late and loses these like important files for a court case in which he's the lawyer for. So like these things all get fucked up. They screw each other's day up. And then from then on, it becomes a series of like petty revenge between the two men. And I don't know, it was kind of fun. Like it's the kind of movie that they wouldn't make anymore. It's definitely not like the most amazing movie I've ever seen in my life. Not even close. But it's just the kind of thing where it's like, hey, this is like pretty damn solid. And like, I don't know. It feels like a throwback and I enjoyed it. Okay, now we are up to rewatches. First up, I watched Talladega Nights, which is funny. Then I watched Silver Linings Playbook, which is less funny and more depressing, but still fantastic. Then I rewatched Last Stop in Yuma County, which only came out this year, but I rewatched it with my parents to show them because I thought it was so good and they thought it was pretty good too. Then I watched 30 Days of Night, which is a movie I had not seen in fucking eons. I hadn't seen this thing in years, but I had remembered liking it when I was either a kid or a teenager or whatever. So I wanted to watch it, see if I liked it still, and yeah, it's pretty good. Maybe not as good as I was expecting and remembered it being, but like, yeah, it's fun. Then I watched Zodiac, which is the aforementioned David Fincher and his whole precise filmmaking that isn't exactly in Benjamin Button, which is more just like this weird, wholesome movie that feels out of his filmography. But anyway, Zodiac, though, is fucking brilliant. I love it. Then I watched Boiling Point. I watched this with a friend to kind of show him how amazing it is. If you don't know, it's basically about a restaurant on the kind of busiest night of the year. So I assume it's like, you know, around Christmas time or something. They don't specifically say, but it's around that kind of time. And basically it's about all the different people that work in this restaurant and their various struggles. The whole thing is shot within one take, literally. I don't think there are any cheats. Apparently they had to shoot the whole thing 4 times before they got it right. And basically it's about a very high stakes situation working in this kitchen, but it's also a very high stakes filmmaking process as well, as if anybody screws up, they basically have to restart the entire thing again. And so it's just a really fascinating and impressive watch. And it's also emotional and compelling in terms of what's actually going on in the story too. There's nothing about this movie that's bad. I couldn't criticize anything about it. It absolutely blows me away. I fucking love Boiling Point. Then I rewatched 500 Days of Summer, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And yep, it still is. I like it just as much as any other time that I watched it. Then I rewatched Commando. I rewatched this one with one of my best friends, and we just had a hell of a fun time with this movie. Like, there's all the fucking lines, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger says, you know how I told you I was gonna kill you last? I lied. I know, terrible accent, I'm sorry. But he also says on the plane, he's like, what's he say? Oh, don't disturb my friend, please. He's dead tired. I fucking love it. Sorry for my terrible accent. But anyway, this movie's a fucking classic. Certified classic. I don't care what you say. Then I rewatched War Dogs, which is Todd Phillips' best movie. He's the director of Joker and Joker 2 and the Hangover movies, if you don't know. And in between those, he made War Dogs, which is his best movie. Then I also rewatched Memento. I had seen this, but I don't know if I had ever finished it in the past. I never really liked it. it. I never cared about it all that much. And so in saying that, when watching it this time, not knowing the ending kind of makes the movie, doesn't it? It's kind of the whole point, and it does make it a bit better. That being said, I'm still not in love with it. Anyway, then I also rewatched Deadpool and Wolverine again because I just wanted to make sure how I felt about it, I guess. Not one of my favorites of the year, unfortunately. It's fun and good, and I would rewatch it, but it's just not like on the level that I wanted it to be. I think Deadpool 2 is the best of this franchise, and I think Deadpool 1 is in the middle. If I had to rank them, it's 2, 1, 3. Then I rewatched, Fantastic Four. I mentioned how I watched 2 before, but yeah, I also first watched Fantastic Four, which was a rewatch, and yeah, I don't know, it's kind of fun. Then I rewatched Dodgeball, which is just another certified classic. Every single line that Ben Stiller's White Goodman says is laugh out loud funny. Nobody makes me bleed my own blood. And there's also my favorite line from a movie, maybe, where he says, necessary? Is it necessary for me to drink my own urine? No, but I do it anyway. And then I rewatched Avengers Age of Ultron, which is one of my favorite of the whole Marvel franchise, to be honest. I know that's not a popular opinion, but fuck yeah. And then I also rewatched X-Men Days of Future Past, X-Men, X-Men 2, X-Men 3, X-Men First Class, and X-Men Apocalypse, which are all of varying quality, obviously. Apocalypse, not that great. The original, fantastic, underrated. X-Men 2, overrated. X-Men 3, underrated. I think X-Men 3 is a lot better than it gets credit for, to be honest. There's some bad moments, but overall, the whole Cure storyline, very interesting to me. And then First Class, maybe the best of the bunch. Then I also rewatched Devil or Develevator. Devil Elevator. The movie produced by M. Night Shyamalan, not directed by him, as much as they tried to slap his name on all the promotional material when it first came out. This is a movie about a bunch of strangers who get on an elevator, they get stuck in it, and then they start dying, and it turns out one of them just might be the devil. It's fun and silly, but it's fun. Then I watched P2, which is a movie about a woman who basically is stuck overnight in like an underground car park as a killer security guard comes after her, basically, and kills whoever gets in his way. And so, you know, it's kind of B grade and stuff, but I think it's pretty strong. I like it. I've always liked it. Plus, it's a Christmas movie. Then I rewatched Cabin in the Woods, one of the best horror comedies of all time. Then I watched On the Line, which is a Mel Gibson movie where basically he's like a shock jockey. He's a guy on the radio who says controversial shit to piss people off for attention, basically. Anyway, so he goes on his show and he gets called up by somebody who he's presumably offended, and they basically say, you have to stay on the line and do what I say or else I'm gonna kill your kid and your wife or whatever. And so basically it's like a thriller from then on, and I like it. Then I also watched Green Room, which is just one of the most intense movies probably of all time, about this kind of punk band who gets caught up in a neo-Nazi club. Basically they get caught in the green room, which is like where the bands hang out before they play, and they witness a crime that they shouldn't have witnessed. A murder takes place. And basically it's about the neo-Nazis now, having to deal with their witnesses. They can't just let them go because they've seen too much. And so basically it's about what they do from there and the very tense situation that this punk band finds themselves in. Things get bloody and horrible, and it's great and very realistic. Then I watched The Purge, which it's The Purge. It's good. Then I watched The Purge, Anarchy, which is even better. And then I watched The Gift, which is the Joel Edgerton movie. It's a Blumhouse movie, but it's not exactly like a popcorn horror movie or anything. It's much more complex than that. And I think it is fantastic. If you haven't seen it, that's a huge recommend. Then I watched The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, not the original from whatever year the original's from, but the remake from 2009 with Denzel Washington and John Travolta. Sorry, huge fans of the original if you're out there. I've never seen it, but I have seen the remake, and I rewatched the remake instead of watching the original because I'm a Philistine. Then I watched Let's Be Cops, which is another Jake Johnson movie. This is a comedy about two guys who decide that they should just be cops by putting on police uniforms and bossing people around. And basically, if this was made today, it might be looked at as a bit problematic and be like, oh, I don't know about this premise. But it was made in a more innocent time, and it was just a light comedy with nothing really political to say or anything like that when it was made like 10 years ago. Then I rewatched Saw X, which is the latest of the Saw franchise, which I have a hot take on, thinking that it's not that good. It's on the lower end of the Saw franchise, in my opinion. And I'm alone on that opinion. Most people think this is one of the best of the bunch. A lot of people think it's the second best one, just behind the original. I don't get it. I don't understand. A lot of people criticize the Saw films for just being about traps, right? And that's the bad thing about the Saw movies. But then they like Saw X, which is just about traps. Like, sure, the first hour humanizes John Kramer more than any of the other movies, but that second half is traps galore and nothing more. Whoa, I should be a rapper. Anyway, the point is, I feel like this movie is like not as clever as it should be. It's told in chronological order, which is boring and kind of a disappointment to me. There's no real twist here, which is hugely a disappointment to me. It's just very straightforward for a Saw film. And I don't know, for me, that's a letdown. I also hate how when it does come to the traps, how the people basically don't get enough time to do what they have to do. And when they basically do what they have to do, they still die anyway because of some technicality. And it's like, I don't think that technicality, like not having just the tiniest bit of brain weight or whatever during the brain surgery trap, I don't think that really would have made much of a difference when it comes to that dude's rehabilitation. You know what I mean? Like, he would have learned his lesson or not either way. And I just think it's bullshit, you know? I don't know. I'm not as in love with this movie as a lot of people are. I think Amanda, though, is probably the best part of this film. I do love how she's kind of sympathetic to, I think the character's name is Gabriella, who's only there because she's a drug addict, basically. And Amanda sympathizes with that as she was basically in the exact same situation prior to the events of the first Saw. And so I find that kind of character dynamic very interesting. But there's a lot in here that I think is a lot more simplistic than it should have been. And I don't know. It's good. It's still Saw. I still enjoy it. But it's on the lower end, down there with Spiral and Saw 7 for me. Not so much up there with the original and Saw 6, which are the best ones. Then I rewatched The Hangover, The Hangover 2, The Hangover 3, which are all fine. I like The Hangover 3 the most because it actually has a story. By the time you're watching it, you're like, whoa, a plot. What a nice treat. Then I also rewatched The Interview, which I talked about before after I saw Smile 2. I needed a palate cleanser. I needed something to get my mind off the creepy shit. So I watched The Interview and yeah, it was fun. Then I rewatched Walk Hard, and that is just laugh out loud funny all the way through. Then I rewatched the original Saw with commentary featuring James Wan, Leigh Whannell, and Cary Elwes, which was really nice to hear as they kind of talk along following the sort of release of the film. This was early days, this one that I listened to, so they didn't know that it was going to become a franchise yet. And you can really hear the respect in Cary Elwes that he has for these young filmmakers as he supports them by being in their movie. And basically it's about them all just kind of like shit talking and having fun and just explaining certain insights within the film. It's a really fun listen, to be honest. They're all very down to earth and explain how the film was made and their challenges that they went through. They're not afraid to criticize their own work. And I don't know, there's something really like, there's this nice brotherly bond between James and Leigh that you can hear, but also Cary Elwes sounds very, just like a nice guy, which was surprising to me. I was surprised that he even bothered to do a commentary for this, because I've seen like videos since where he has shown how much he doesn't care about Saw as a franchise. But clearly he was pretty passionate for this project, and that was nice to see. Then I watched the Saw 2 commentary with just James Wan and Leigh Whannell, and they talk a surprising amount of shit in this commentary, mostly about Darren Lynn Bousman, the director who would take on the next few films, and the franchise as a whole and the direction that it took kind of after they were starting to step out of it a little bit. You know, James Wan didn't even really have anything to do with the making of Saw 2. I think he's counted as a producer, but I think that's mainly only in name and not so much a creative process kind of way. And Leigh Whannell did write Saw 2, but still, they were both sort of going on their way out of the Saw franchise in order to make what they made afterwards, which included Dead Silence and then eventually Insidious and stuff like that. But yeah, they talk a surprising amount of shit in this Saw 2 commentary, and they are hilarious. If these guys did not become successful filmmakers, they would have a podcast by now, and they would be laugh out loud funny every time because they have the best dynamic. It's so funny. I absolutely love this commentary. If you can find a way to listen to this specific one that I'm talking about with these two for Saw 2, listen to it. It is so funny. It's a really good time listening to it. Then I also watched Saw 3 with the commentary. This had Leigh Whannell and Darren Lynn Bousman and a few of the producers or something like that. I don't remember who else was on it. But yeah, this was also interesting to listen to. Not as good as the ones with James Wan, but still fairly good. Then I rewatched The Shawshank Redemption. I watched this with my parents. It was just on TV when I was there at one point, and we're just kind of like, we should watch all of this. And we did, but we put a streaming service on so we wouldn't have to watch all the ads and everything. And it was so just worth it. Like, it's just such a good movie. No, it's not the best movie of all time, as IMDb would suggest and has suggested forever, and I think still suggests. It's been the top movie on IMDb for forever. It's not that good, but it is good. Then I rewatched Shaun of the Dead with the commentary by Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright. And then I rewatched Spider-Man 3 with the commentary with the entire cast and Sam Raimi. Then I watched The Invisible Man with Leigh Whannell's commentary just by himself, and The Upgrade with commentary with Leigh Whannell just by himself. And I'm really obsessed with listening to commentaries, at least I was in October anyway. Then I rewatched Due Date, which is another Todd Phillips movie. This is a road trip comedy with Robert Downey Jr. and Zach Galifianakis, and it's fine. Then I watched Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and in comparison, whoa, what a difference. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is a Shane Black movie, also with Robert Downey Jr. And Val Kilmer. But yeah, basically, it's funny just how different they are, given that they're both basically buddy comedies with Robert Downey Jr. But Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is far, far, far superior. So much more clever, so much more funny. How it's kind of got like the meta stuff where they point out with voiceover narration the kind of structure of the film itself and things like that. It's very fast-paced and quick-witted and stuff. Love Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And it's technically a Christmas movie. Then I watched Step Brothers, which in comparison again to Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, how fucking stupid. I don't know. I've always kind of liked Step Brothers, but upon rewatching it this time, maybe I just wasn't in the mood, but it just seems so dumb to me and it just made me roll my eyes. Sorry, I know this is a pretty popular movie and I think I like it for the most part usually, but watching this time, I'm just like, oh yeah, he puts his balls on the drum set. Ha ha ha, how funny. It's just all really low-hanging fruit and I'm just like, yeah, I don't know, this is stupid. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood, like I said, but this time I wasn't into it. Then I rewatched Identity Thief, which is a Melissa McCarthy comedy, also a road trip movie, and I like this movie, I always have. Then I rewatched Shanghai Noon, which is a movie that I have so much nostalgia for. This is the movie with Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson, and they're like in the cowboy western era, basically. And I used to watch this as a kid, but I watched like the version that we had taped off TV, so there were ad breaks all over the thing. And so when I was watching it this time, as an adult, I kind of started anticipating the ad breaks. I'm like, the ad was usually there at that point and that point. Like, I could feel them coming up, but then obviously I watched it on DVD, so there weren't any ad breaks, but it was funny. And I remembered so specifically from back in the day when it used to be on TV, it would always lead into the ad break with the song, I Wanna Be a Cowboy, Baby. I just like, I don't know, I particularly remembered that. It's just kind of funny to think about. Anyway, then I rewatched Nope, Jordan Peele's Nope, which is a movie that I'm controversially not much of a fan of, especially in comparison to Us and Get Out, which I think are far superior. I don't know, Nope is just like, there's no surprises there for you. It's just, it kind of is what you think it is. And to me, that's really disappointing. I think Stephen Yeun is the very best part of this movie, especially the flashback of his character with the monkey on stage. That's the best part of the movie. I wish that's what this movie was about for the entire runtime, but unfortunately, it's not. It's about aliens, and, well, there's not really any mystery. You know that there's going to be an alien. It's an alien movie. There's going to be an alien. And with that being said, yep, there's an alien. Wow, how surprising. It just kind of is what it is. And to me, that feels a little bit basic for Jordan Peele. And it's not really much of a horror movie either. It's really a sci-fi blockbuster. And to me, he can do better things than that. More interesting things, in my opinion. I don't know. This is a bit of a letdown for me. But I'm kind of alone in that opinion, I know. Then I rewatched The Internship, which is the Vince Vaughn, Owen Wilson comedy where they work for Google. And basically, I'm kind of nostalgic for this movie, to be honest, even though I know nobody else in the world would be. But I kind of am, so shut up. Then I rewatched This Is the End, and a bit like Step Brothers, this is a movie that I've rewatched over the years. But I've never liked This Is the End. I've always been like, I don't know, this is a dumb movie, it's immature, it's gross, it's just, it sucks. But then every single time after that, I'm like, yeah, I was probably judging it too harshly last time. I'll watch it, I'll probably like it. I like Seth Rogen and stuff. And I like the cast, but they're all going for the most easy, lazy jokes ever. I feel like they're all so much better than what they're doing here, especially Seth Rogen, who I'm a particular fan of. But here, it just feels gross and stupid, and I hate it. And it's just like, I'm not 10 years old, so I don't like it. And I think only a 10-year-old would be able to enjoy it, you know? I sound so fucking, like, snooty saying that shit. Anyway, then I rewatched Spy, which is another Melissa McCarthy comedy, except this one, obviously, is about spies. And it's kind of like how Tucker and Dale versus Evil kind of lampoons or whatever the horror genre, and they came together and does rom-coms in a similar way. I feel like this is that version of those movies, but for spy movies. And so if you like those other movies, I would recommend the hell out of this, especially for Jason Statham's part, who was hilarious in this movie. But yeah, I like this movie. I would say that upon an initial kind of glance, I get that it kind of looks like it might be on the level of like Paul Blart Mall Cop, but it's not. This movie respects its main character in Melissa McCarthy, and, you know, it's not just all about like, oh, fat woman funny. It's a lot more respectable than that and better than that. And it actually has like a good actual spy story too. The espionage stuff is not half-assed. It's actually kind of interesting and good. Obviously, it's much more of a comedy than it is a serious action movie, but I'm just saying, like, it's probably better than it needs to be in that way as well. But it's also laugh out loud funny. I like it quite a lot. Then I also rewatched The King of Staten Island, which is the Pete Davidson movie directed by Judd Apatow, and I really enjoy it. Though that being said, watching it this time kind of made me feel a bit like a piece of shit because I relate hard to this main character, and I'm aware that this main character kind of a loser, so that's kind of sad. But he has like these vague dreams and maybe one day wanting to be a tattoo artist and aspirations for things like that. But he's kind of just like this, you know, burnout, not doing anything, not really pursuing his dreams, not really going anywhere, and just like, you know, hanging out with his friends, being kind of a loser and stuff. And I don't know, I kind of related to him. I'm like, fuck, this is me, isn't it? I should become a firefighter like he does in this movie. No, not really. Not literally, like I don't have to go down the exact same path he does, but I don't know. It was a bit of an inspirational movie to watch to be like, I should make some changes. And so hopefully I follow through with that in the new year, but we'll see about that. Yeah, I like this movie overall. Then I rewatched Knives Out, which is obviously the Rian Johnson movie. Just a fucking modern masterpiece. Instant classic as soon as it came out. I find it so funny that Rian Johnson made a Star Wars movie, then everybody incorrectly hated it, and then basically he was just like, fuck yous then, I'm gonna make these random fucking mystery movies, and they just happen to be masterpieces. And I'm glad. We're better off with Rian Johnson making these Knives Out movies than Star Wars movies, so I'm cool with it. Then I rewatched The Disaster Artist, which is the movie about the Franco brothers, kind of showing the true story behind Tommy Wiseau and The Room, the disaster piece The Room, and Greg Sestero and their friendship, basically. And it's all about the mystery behind Tommy Wiseau, and not really answering those questions, but it's kind of interesting how, like, we still don't know so much about this guy. He's kind of an enigma. We don't know where he's from, how old he is, where he got his money from, all these sorts of things. And how he made this film, The Room, it's just like such a fascinating story. It's more interesting than the movie The Room itself, I would say. And yeah, I always get kind of a kick out of watching this movie, even though I would never rewatch The Room, I don't think. Like, I don't really like watching like, oh yeah, a bad movie to laugh at it. Like, it kind of feels like a waste of time. But watching The Disaster Artist is just like, I don't know, there's a certain amount of sympathy that they have for Tommy Wiseau, but there's also like, it's also kind of making fun of him. Like, you know how like when they show The Room in the movie and everybody laughs and he kind of acts like, oh yeah, I'm glad you enjoy my comedy as it was always intended to be, when clearly it wasn't. Like, you feel bad for the guy. And I think that the movie articulates certain things well when it comes to feeling sympathetic towards him, but also understanding that he's kind of a weirdo, and that's an unavoidable fact, really. And yeah, I like this movie. Then I rewatched The Mummy, and I also rewatched The Mummy Returns. And with that being said, when I first watched The Mummy, I was like, oh yeah, I like this as a kid. I'm gonna watch this, and yeah, it's fun and nostalgic and whatever. But when I watched The Mummy Returns, when I watched the second one, I was like, this is the one that I watched a lot as a kid. Like, I vaguely remembered the first one, but when I watched the second one, I'm like, oh fuck, this part, and this part, and this part, it seems so much more familiar. And yeah, that is the one that I liked so much more. So it was a bit funny discovering that, I guess. Then I rewatched Gladiator. I watched this with my dad and mum. I watched this with my parents before me and my dad went to go see Gladiator 2. And as I said before, just very, very solid dad bro action movie. I like it a lot. Then I watched Paul. This is the movie with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, but not directed by Edgar Wright. Do you think he felt sad and betrayed by them? I don't know. But this is about an alien, and it's okay. Then I watched The Town, directed by and starring Ben Affleck, and this is a movie that I remembered liking, like, quite a bit, but I didn't really remember that much in detail. Well, I watched it this time, and I fucking loved The Town. I rated it 5 stars on Letterboxd, and I'm obsessed with this fucking movie. It is so good. Nobody talks about it enough. Then I watched The Departed, which is another movie that I actually remember disliking. I was like, yeah, I don't give a shit about this. I don't really like Martin Scorsese and all that stuff. Whatever. But I rewatched it this time, and boy, did I care so much more about it and everything that was going on. I got so fucking wrapped up in this thing, the narrative, keeping up with like the difference between Leonardo DiCaprio, who is a good guy pretending to be a bad guy undercover, and then Matt Damon, who is a bad guy pretending to be a good guy undercover, and their whole kind of Synchronicity, is that the right word? Is that a word? I don't know. They're like linked in that way, and I find that fascinating. And seeing how everything plays out, it's just really interesting. I fucking really like this movie. It's not exactly a hot take, but for the first time, I like it. Every other time I've tried it, I didn't like it. I found it boring and all that stuff, but I cared so much more this time. I was so much more invested. I'm not sure why. Maybe I just grew up a bit. Maybe I paid more attention this time. I'm not sure, but I like The Departed. Departed. Then I watched Catch Me If You Can, another Leonardo DiCaprio movie, but from back in the day, 2002, I think this is. Steven Spielberg movie where it's about Leonardo DiCaprio being a con man. Tom Hanks coming after him, and it's a bit of fun. They get in some hijinks and stuff. But it's also based on a true story as this guy commits crimes around the world, pretty much. But it's also kind of lighthearted and stuff, but also very depressing at times. I don't know, there's a lot here in terms of different emotions. I like it a lot. Then I also rewatched Saving Private Ryan, going on kind of a Spielberg kick, I guess. And Saving Private Ryan is one of those movies that I appreciate what it's going for. I think the whole like doomsday kind of, storming the beachfront part is absolutely brilliant and horrible to watch. But I also find the premise after that in terms of going after Private Ryan and trying to save him kind of infuriating. I know it's the point, as the soldiers kind of point out, why is this guy's one life, worth sacrificing all our lives for to go save him. And so the movie knows that it's kind of wrong, but it also kind of doesn't, because it shows that he lives and that it was worth it in the end. But I don't agree with the decision. Especially when once they get there, and I found this part really interesting though, because I didn't remember it, when they got there and approached Private Ryan, he didn't want to leave anyway. He didn't want to leave his brothers in arms, Like, he wanted to stay loyal to his boys in this war. And I find it really fascinating where it's like, well, if you don't come with us and leave them behind, then the men who came to get you here died for no reason. And it's like, what's the right thing to do there? And that is kind of interesting, but I still can't quite get beyond that initial thinking that the mission itself is kind of stupid, and it makes me not be fully invested in the story. I feel like, I don't know, but it is very well done. And yeah, anyway, then I also rewatched The Wizard of Oz following Wicked to see how it was depicted differently, and boy, man, The Wizard of Oz ain't no Wicked, I'll tell you that much. Then I rewatched Con Air, which is another classic 1997 Year of the Cage. Con Air and Face Off came out that year. Anyway, Con Air is so good, when he says, "Put the bunny back in the box." That's probably the wrong accent. I don't fucking know. Anyway, but yeah, hell of a lot of fun. Then I rewatched Elf with my parents who had never seen it before. One of my favorite Christmas movies of all time. Probably my favorite wholesale Christmas movie. I mean, I would count something like Iron Man 3 on The Nice Guys as my favorite Christmas movies, but those are really technicalities. When it comes to actual full-on spirited Christmas movies, Elf is my favorite one. Now we're up to TV shows, which I'll get through real quick because there's not that many of them. I watched The Bear season 3, which was good but not as good as the previous seasons. I also watched the last season of Ted Lasso, which was good but not as good as the previous seasons. I also watched all of New Girl, which became my obsession for a couple months. Went through all the way through it, binged it and everything. At first I was like, this show's kind of mid, it's fine, whatever. But I came to really love the characters, and I was sad when it ended, especially since it doesn't have much of an ending, which was kind of disappointing. Then I watched The Curse, which is the Nathan Fielder, Emma Stone show. I love Nathan Fielder because of his sort of reality TV shows like Nathan For You and The Rehearsal. I would say The Curse, which is much more of a fictionalized, narrative, is kind of a letdown, especially when it comes to how it ends, which just devolved into absolute nonsense to me. I don't understand the last episode at all. I think it's absolutely stupid. I fucking hate it. Up until that point, I thought it was okay, but I'm definitely not crazy about it, which was disappointing because I really do love Nathan For You in particular. Anyway, then I also watched Baby Reindeer, which is a heartbreaking show in so many different ways and very fascinating. Absolute instant 5 stars on Letterboxd, because sometimes Letterboxd includes TV shows. And yeah, I liked how it showed sort of a sympathetic light on a male who is being abused, basically, and sexually abused, and I thought that was sort of an important side of things to tell, which often doesn't really get told. Then I watched Brand New Cherry Flavor, which is a show on Netflix, which was fine. It's like this horror show. I don't really remember it that well, to be honest, and it wasn't that long ago that I watched it. Then I watched Sweet Pea, which is basically the female version of Dexter, and it's the girl who plays Lucy on the Fallout TV show who is the main character. And basically it's about this woman who works at this local newspaper and starts killing people because she can, I guess. There's not really that much of a reason. She's just sick of being bullied and she starts killing people. And it's not justified or anything, but it's fun. It's not that serious. It's not that seriously portrayed or anything, so it's fine. It's fiction, who cares? Then I watched the last few seasons of Curb Your Enthusiasm. I watched the seasons where Larry David had gone on a bit of a break, 2010 or so, up until 2017 or something. And then, yeah, so I watched those last few seasons from 2017 onwards. And, you know, it's good. Those are always pretty funny and everything, so yeah. Then I am now also watching Schitt's Creek, which is another show, much like New Girl, where at first I'm like, I don't care about this. I don't like these characters. This is nothing. This seems mid. But I watched the whole season in one day and I started liking it. I'm on season 2 still at the moment and I'm gonna see where I go from there. And now just quickly, video games. There's only 2 of them. I've been playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 because that came onto Game Pass. That was from August onto October, where Black Ops 6 came out, also on Game Pass. And now that has become my life. I've played about 120 hours of that in the past month or so, and I'm doing the grind for the first time. I'm doing all the little challenges and shit and upgrading and all this stuff, trying to get the different camos for the guns and stuff. This used to be things that I would never, ever, ever pay attention to. I didn't care what my character looked like. I didn't really care what guns I was using and all that stuff. And I'm probably, you know, being a bit of a sucker, buying into, like, feeling obligated to do challenges and all this shit, getting sucked into the game exactly where they want me to be. But it's fun. I don't know. It's fun this time, so I'm trying it. I'm hoping to get the fucking dark matter camouflage sometime eventually, but I feel like it's going to take forever. Anyway, if you don't play COD, you have no idea what that means. But that has become my obsession. Skyline is the best map, if you're wondering, and I love it. Fucking love Black Ops 6. Sorry, I know it's such a normie game, but like, I don't know. It's become my life lately, so that's where I'm at in life. Anyway, so that's everything that I watched from the months of July to December. That's about all I have to say. If you're still watching after all this, I know it's a really long video, so if you're still watching, thank you so much. And I guess do the things, which are like, comment, share, subscribe, all that shit. I guess that's about all that I have to say. Oh my god, I'm so fucking sick of talking at this point. My back hurts, I'm tired, it's like 1 a.m. I've been talking for 2 hours. But that's the end! Yay, we did it! Alright. So, that's it. Thank you for watching again, and goodbye.